Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Mama Shanti. I am the last discussant of Group 4. But before I will tackle my topic all about, let me start with a question first. Have you ever wondered how babies without formal lessons manage to learn their first words and sentences? The answer lies in two very important factors of first language acquisition, and that is input and discourse. Now, let us know first what is input. So input, it refers to the language that children hear from the people around them, such as parents, caregivers, peers, and even the community. So input, it is like the raw material that children process in order to learn the language. And other description of input. Input provides vocabulary, grammar, and sentence structures that children eventually imitate and internalize. So the amount and quality of input matter a lot. Do you agree with that? So I have here an example of input. So for example, children who are exposed to richer vocabulary and more interactive conversations usually acquire language faster. Also, caregivers speech, how they talk to the children. Sometimes it is called child-directed speech. It is often simplified and repetitive. So this actually helps children focus on important words and meanings. For instance, when a mother points at a ball and says, "Look, ball," the child gets a clear connection between the word and the object. Next, the discourse. So discourse is a language used that goes beyond single words or sentences. This includes conversations, storytelling, and everyday interactions. And discourse helps children learn how language works in real communication. It teaches them turn-taking, politeness, and how to keep a conversation going. Discourse also helps them understand pragmatics or meaning in context. For example, one word can mean different depending on the tone or situation. But in discourse, it helps develop narrative skills like sequencing events and expressing cause and effect. So, for instance, when a child tells a story about their day and the caregiver responds with questions like, "And what happened next?" it encourages the child to use richer language and organize their thoughts. So, those are the meanings of input and discourse. Now, let's know what is the relationship between input and discourse. So input, it gives children the building blocks of language, such as words and grammar, while discourse shows them how to use those building blocks in real communication. So when we combine them together, input and discourse do not just provide knowledge of language but also communicative competence, which is the ability to use language appropriately in everyday life. So, in summary, before I will proceed to the issues of input, input provides the exposure needed for learning, while discourse, it helps children practice and apply it. So both are essential because without input, there is no foundation for language. And without discourse, language cannot be used effectively in interaction. Now, let's move on to the issues of input. So, first issues is the quantity of input. So the quantity of input, it is the amount or volume of linguistic exposure a child receives from the people around them. It refers to how often and how much language the child hears and interacts with on daily basis. So So the quantity of input, it is the amount of language exposure matters. Children who are often spoken to usually develop vocabulary and grammar faster. And on the other hand, children with limited exposure, like those in neglected or isolated situations, often experience language delays. Have you ever encountered children like that? Like, even if they are almost 2 years old or even 1 year old, they are not, they don't know how much to talk. So the issue there is children with limited input, for example, due to neglect or reduced interaction, may have delays in acquisition. So children need enough input to build their mental grammar system. If they don't hear enough language, they won't have the raw material to process and learn from. So research shows that children from language-rich homes, where parents talk and read them often, usually have larger vocabularies than those with less exposure. Now let's move on to the second issue, which is the quality of input. It means how clear, correct, and meaningful the language is that children hear. It's not just about talking a lot, it's about talking well and interactively. So the gist here is not, it's just not about how much language they hear, but also what kind. If the speech around the child is rich and grammatically correct, learning is smoother. But if input is fragmented or incorrect, development may be slower. So for you to be clear enough, or it is clear for you, so it means that the language a child is exposed to may not be clear, rich, or regular enough to support fast and healthy learning. So the issue there is the poor quality or inconsistent input can slow down language development. It means that the language a child is exposed to may not be clear, rich, or regular enough to support fast and healthy learning. So the poor quality there, if adults speak to children in ways that are too complex, unclear, or grammatically incorrect, the child may have a harder time understanding and learning. For inconsistent input, this happens when children don't receive enough exposure or when the input changes too often. For example, if parents rarely talk to their child or only sometimes use the language, the child may not hear words often enough to remember and use them. So poor quality or inconsistent input both can slow down how quickly and effectively children acquire their first language. Next is the child-directed speech, or CDS. It refers to the special way adults often talk to young children. Simplified, repetitive, and exaggerated speech often used by caregivers. So what is the simplest meaning of CDS, or child-directed speech? It is the baby talk. So the issue there is debate exists whether CDS is essential for children. In some cultures acquire language even without it. So in some cultures, adults do not use CDS or speak directly to infants at all. Instead, children learn by listening to conversations around them, adult-to-adult speech, and by observing interaction. Despite the lack of CDS, these children still acquire their first language successfully, showing that child-directed speech may not be strictly necessary. But CDS is also helpful because it makes learning easier and faster, but it may not be universal or essential. What matters most is that children receive sufficient input and opportunities for discourse. whether or not CDS is used. Now let's move